"You're not family," they screamed, until the safe revealed the truth no one expected. The rain falls like blades against the black iron gate. She's there, on her knees in the mud, her hands trembling as she tries to gather the clothes scattered across the soaked ground. The old suitcase burst open upon impact, and now her few possessions float in the dirty water like wreckage from a shipwreck. Behind the gate, silhouettes watch from the illuminated porch. One of them laughs. Another spits words sharper than any knife. "You're not family." The echo of those words follows every beat of her heart. The gate slams shut with a metallic crash that sounds like a final sentence. The lights of the mansion go out one by one, as if she had never existed. 30 years later, a silver steel safe rests on a dark mahogany table. The lawyer turns the combination with precise fingers. The internal mechanism clicks. The door opens slowly, revealing a yellowed envelope aged by time. A name is written in the trembling handwriting of a dying man. The same name that was once shouted, spat on, erased. Blood always finds its way home. The mansion had always seemed larger than it really was. Perhaps because secrets need space to be kept, or because loneliness echoes better through wide corridors. He ruled that house like a silent king, stern, distant, unreadable. The children grew up fearing him. The wife died young, leaving only silver-framed portraits and the scent of gardenias no one else dared to wear. After her came another woman, not to marry, but to serve. A quiet worker who cleaned the halls, brewed the tea, organized the medicines. She never asked for anything, never demanded acknowledgement. And then the child was born. Dark hair, deep eyes, tiny hands, clinging to her mother's skirt. No one spoke of who the father was, but everyone knew. Silence said it all. She grew up in the shadows of that house between the kitchen and the back room. She ate leftovers, wore what no longer fit the others. She learned early that her place was far from the main table. When her mother died, under circumstances no one dared to investigate, the girl was left alone, and the legitimate family decided it was time to erase what should never have existed. The sky was heavy that morning. The sky was heavy that morning, thick and leaden, as if made of molten iron. She woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. It wasn't unusual. Ever since the old man's death, the house had lived in a state of silent war. The 3 legitimate children had returned for the funeral and never left. They wandered through the rooms like crows fighting over carrion, inspecting every piece of furniture, every painting, every scrap of inheritance that had not yet been divided. She tried to make herself invisible. She woke before dawn to clean, prepared breakfast before they could ask, disappeared into the back rooms whenever voices grew too loud. But invisibility wasn't enough. They didn't just want her unseen, they wanted her gone. It was the eldest son who came up the stairs that morning. He didn't knock. He simply pushed the door open so hard that the handle struck the wall, leaving a dent in the chipped paint. "Pack your things," he said, not even looking at her. "You've got 1 hour." She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her bare feet touching the cold floor. I don't understand." "There's nothing to understand." He crossed his arms, the black suit still smelling faintly of mothballs from the funeral 3 days earlier. "This house belongs to the family. You're not family." The words fell like stones. "My mother lived here for 20 years. I was born in this house. Your mother was a servant." His voice was cold, deliberately cruel. "And you are a mistake. A mistake my father made, and one we are not obligated to carry." She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "He raised me. He gave me a home. He called me. He tolerated you," the man interrupted. "There's a difference, and now that he's gone, that tolerance ends here." He threw an old suitcase onto the floor, the same one that had belonged to her mother. 1 hour. After that, I call the police." The door slammed. She stood there for a long moment, unable to move. The room around her seemed smaller, as if the walls were closing in. Then slowly she began to gather her things. There wasn't much. A few worn clothes, a hardcover book the old man had once given her, without a word, a faded photograph of her mother smiling in a way she had never seen in life. When she came downstairs, they were all waiting. The 3 siblings, their spouses, even a few distant cousins who had appeared like vultures smelling money. They formed a human wall between her and the front door. "Through the back door," said the middle sister, a woman with thin lips and sharp eyes. "You came in through it, you leave through it." She tightened her grip on the handle of the suitcase. She wanted to scream, to demand respect, to say she had as much right as any of them, but the words died in her throat. That's when the youngest son stepped forward. He was the cruelest of the three, the one who hid behind polite smiles and venomous words. "Wait," he said, turning to the others. "Why let her go quietly? She'll just come back later, crying, begging for charity, claiming she has rights." The sister smirked. "What do you suggest? That the neighborhood knows? Let there be no doubt." He flung the front door open. The street was busy. Neighbors passing by began to slow down, noticing the commotion. Then he grabbed her arm and dragged her outside. "No!" She tried to pull away, but he was too strong. They dragged her to the gate in front of everyone. The rain had started to fall, thin and cold. People gathered closer, whispering. The youngest son raised his voice loud enough for all to hear. "This woman has no connection to our family. She's been pretending to be an heir, but she's nothing but a liar. The daughter of a servant who took advantage of our father's kindness." "That's not true," she cried, tears mixing with the rain. "He was my father too." "You have no proof," the sister shouted, her eyes gleaming with hatred. "No documents, no evidence, nothing." "You're not family," the eldest bellowed, the words booming like thunder. And then, as if those words carried a physical weight, he shoved her. She fell backward, straight into the mud forming on the uneven ground. The suitcase burst open, her few clothes scattering into the dirty water. The book sank. The photo of her mother floated for an instant, before the current carried it down the gutter. She knelt there in the mud, her hands sinking into the wet earth as the neighbors watched in silence. "You're not family," they shouted again in chorus, as if repeating it could make the lie true. The gate slammed shut, the mansion's lights went out, and she was left alone in the rain while the world moved on as if she had never existed. She gathered what she could, the soaked clothes, the broken suitcase, but her mother's photo was gone, swallowed by the sewer. With trembling hands and an aching body, she stood and began to walk. She didn't look back, but there, under the rain washing the blood from her scraped knee, she made a vow. One day, the truth would rise from that vault of lies, and when it did, their screams would echo back, and only this time in despair. There are many kinds of hunger. The one that eats at your stomach is the most obvious, but there's another, deeper one, the hunger to belong. In the first days after her expulsion, she wandered aimlessly. She slept in overcrowded shelters where the smell of disinfectant barely masked the despair. She ate in soup kitchens where volunteers served food with pitying eyes that burned worse than humiliation. No one asked where she came from. No one wanted to know. Among the city's invisible, she was just one more. It took 2 weeks before she found work, washing dishes at a roadside restaurant. The owner was a middle-aged man with grease-stained hands and tired eyes. He didn't ask for references, didn't ask about family. "Can you handle hard work?" "Yes." "Then you start tomorrow. Night shift." The pay was meager, barely enough for a tiny room in a boarding house where the walls were thin as paper and the neighbors' shouts carried through the night. But it was a roof. It was something. She worked from 6 in the evening until 3 in the morning, came home when the city still slept, fingers swollen from scrubbing pots, back aching, skin and hair reeking of grease. But she didn't complain. Complaining was a luxury for those who had someone to complain to. On weekends, when the restaurant closed early, she walked through the city. She couldn't afford entertainment, but walking was free. She watched families in the parks, children running, parents laughing, grandparents feeding pigeons. Ordinary scenes, trivial. But to her it was like staring through a shop window at a world she could never buy. Once she passed by the mansion, not on purpose, or so she told herself, but her feet carried her there anyway, as if her body had its own memory and refused to forget. The gate was closed, the windows lit. New cars gleamed in the driveway, imported, polished. She could hear voices inside, laughter muffled by distance. They were fine. Their lives went on, untouched, guiltless. She clenched her fists and kept walking. Over time, routine dulled the pain. Wake up, work, sleep, wake up, work, sleep. The days blurred together in a grey mass where weeks lost their meaning. She made a few acquaintances at the boarding house, an older woman who read tarot cards for spare change, a man who repaired broken watches and talked to himself, a girl who had run away from home and now sold flowers on the corner. None of them asked about the past. It was an unspoken rule among the broken. Who you were didn't matter, only what you could still be. But at night, when exhaustion wasn't enough to defeat insomnia, her mind went back to that day. The shouting, the mud, the gate closing. "You're not family." The words still echoed, and with them, a question that never found an answer. Why hadn't he defended her? The old man had always been distant. He never called her daughter aloud, never let her sit at the main table. But he never expelled her either. He allowed her to stay, gave her that room in the back, that book. There had always been something about him, a tension, as if he were fighting a battle within himself. She remembered one night, months before his death. He was sitting alone in the library, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring into nothing. She passed the doorway, trying not to make a sound, but he saw her. "Come here." She hesitated, then obeyed, stood in the doorway, hands clasped. "Sit." She sat on the edge of an old armchair, her back straight, her body tense. He drank slowly. The silence between them was thick as fog. Then, without looking at her, he said, "There are things a man can't fix while he's alive." She frowned. "Sir? But that doesn't mean he doesn't try." He turned to her then, and for the first time, his eyes, usually hard, were wet. "You look like her." She knew he meant her mother. "One day," he continued, voice hoarse, "one day you'll understand why things were the way they were, and I hope you won't hate me as much as I hate myself." She wanted to ask more, to understand, but before she could speak, he waved a hand, dismissing her. "Go. Leave an old man to his ghosts." That was the last conversation they ever had. 3 weeks later, he was dead. Now lying on that thin mattress in a room that smelled of mildew and loneliness, she wondered, what had he meant? What things hadn't he been able to fix? She didn't know. But something inside her, a stubborn spark that refused to die, told her that one day she would. One day someone would open the right door, someone would find the right key, and when that happened, the shout that cast her out would be only the prelude to something much greater. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months she didn't dream of mud or gates. She dreamed of a vault that opened slowly, revealing the truth everyone had tried to bury. She learned of his death 3 days after it happened, not through a call, not through a letter, but by accident, as she passed a newsstand. His face was on the front page of the obituary section, an old photograph, serious, composed, with eyes that still seemed to pierce through the paper. The headline read, "Influential businessman dies at 78, leaves behind an empire and a grieving family." She stopped right there, in the middle of the sidewalk, while people hurried past her. She bought the newspaper with the coins she had saved for the bus fare, Reed standing up, her fingers trembling as they held the pages. The article was cold, factual. It spoke of the businesses he built, the properties he owned, the 3 children he left behind as heirs. She wasn't mentioned. Neither was her mother, as if they had never existed. But what hurt most wasn't the omission. It was realizing that, even in death, he remained an enigma, a man no one had ever truly known. Reserved and a few words, the text read, he was respected but rarely understood. She folded the newspaper slowly and kept walking. Her feet carried her to the church where the wake had taken place. She arrived too late. The doors were closed. Only a few workers remained, gathering the last wilted flowers. She stood outside, staring at the stone steps where they had surely posed for photos. The legitimate children, solemn and elegant, accepting condolences with composed faces. While she had been washing dishes miles away, unaware he was gone. Something broke inside her in that moment. It wasn't sharp pain, but a dull, heavy sadness that settled deep, like fog in her bones. She would never get the chance to ask. Never know why he kept her close, yet always at a distance. Why he never publicly admitted she was his daughter. Why in those last months of life he had looked at her with that heavy expression, as if wanting to say something but unable to. Now all those answers were buried with him, or so she thought. That night, back in her cramped boarding room, she opened the drawer where she kept the few things she'd salvaged from her expulsion. Between folded clothes she found the book, the one he had given her without explanation. It was an old volume of poetry, worn leather cover, yellowed pages. She had never been much of a reader, but she had kept that book as something sacred. Now, with him gone, she opened it for the first time in months, and that's when she saw it. On the inside cover, written by hand in faded ink, was a single line, "For the one who carries what could not be said." No signature, no date. But she recognized the handwriting. It was his. She traced the letters with her fingers, as if she could absorb the meaning through touch. What did he mean? What was she carrying? She flipped through the book, page by page, searching for another message. There was nothing. Only poems about lost love, regret, and second chances that never came. She closed the book and pressed it against her chest. "Why?" she whispered into the emptiness. "Why didn't you tell me while you were alive?" Silence was the only answer, but that night something shifted. The resignation that had settled in during the months of exile began to crack. A slow, simmering anger began to rise, not against him, against them, the sons who had thrown her out, the family that had erased her, the world that had decided she didn't deserve even a line in an obituary. She didn't know how or when, but a certainty began to take root within her, a stubborn seed in barren soil. This wasn't over. Her story didn't end in the mud, at the locked gate, in invisibility. Somehow the truth would come out. And when it did, all those who made her kneel in the dirt would face what they had tried to bury. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual, got ready for another shift at the restaurant. But before leaving, she did something she hadn't done in months. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror, hanging crooked on the wall. The face staring back was thinner, harder. Dark circles framed her tired eyes, eyes that had lost their shine, but there was still life there, still fight. "You're not family," she said softly, echoing their words. Then, for the first time since her expulsion, she smiled. A small, sad, but genuine smile. "Let's see how long you can keep that lie alive." She placed the book back in the drawer carefully and left for work. But something had changed. She was no longer just a survivor. Now she was waiting. Because sometimes the dead speak louder than the living, and locked safes, sooner or later, always find someone with the right key. 6 months had passed since the old man's death. Her life had found a rhythm, monotonous, exhausting, but stable. She had managed to get a second job cleaning office buildings at night. She slept little, ate even less, but was saving a small amount of money. Enough maybe to one day rent something better than the damp room where mold painted ghostly maps on the walls. It was on a Tuesday, during her only day off that month, that the letter arrived. She almost didn't notice it. The building's mailbox was stuffed with flyers and old bills from tenants who had long moved out. But something caught her eye. A white, heavy envelope with her name written in elegant script. There was no return address, only an official seal from a law firm. She climbed the stairs with the envelope in her hands, her heart pounding. She locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and carefully opened it. Inside was a formal letter, printed on embossed paper. "To Miss Itauisti from Mahunma, by means of this notice, you are hereby summoned to appear at the law offices of Hamonikriskansti Runes on the Befundannounced day of Hamisi Kalmar at 2 p.m. regarding matters pertaining to the estate of Mr. Saiti deceased on the Mumoki day of Amamahais. Your presence is required and considered urgent. Respectfully, Dr. Sitomaya, attorney in charge of the estate." She read it 3 times. Then a fourth. Estate. Probate. Urgent matter. The words made no sense. Why would they summon her? She wasn't an heir. She'd been cast out, humiliated, erased. They had made that very clear. Her first reaction was fear. Could it be a trap? Another way to humiliate her, this time in public before lawyers and witnesses? But what if it wasn't? What if that phrase he'd written in the book meant something real, for the one who carries what could not be said? The next few days were torture. She barely slept. At work, she broke 2 plates and spilled a whole tray of glasses. The manager yelled, but she barely heard him. When the day finally arrived, she woke before dawn. She chose the least worn clothes she owned, a simple black pair of pants and a white blouse she'd bought second-hand, but still looked decent. She combed her hair carefully. She had no makeup, but splashed water on her face and pinched her cheeks to bring color. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger, someone trying to look dignified in a world that had already decided she wasn't. She left 2 hours early. She couldn't afford a taxi, so she took the bus. The ride felt endless. The law office was in an upscale part of the city, a tall building with mirrored glass and a uniformed doorman. She hesitated at the entrance. People like her didn't belong in places like that. But the letter was in her bag. It was real. She took a deep breath and went in. The receptionist looked her up and down with that expression she knew too well, disdain disguised as professionalism. "May I help you? I have an appointment with Dr. Sam." "Name?" She gave it. The receptionist checked the computer, and her expression changed unsubtly. Surprise, maybe confusion. "One moment." She picked up the phone and spoke in a low voice, casting discreet glances in her direction. After several minutes that felt like hours, the receptionist pointed toward the elevators. 10th floor, room 1003, they're expecting you. Her legs felt weak as she stepped into the elevator. When the doors opened on the 10th floor, she found herself in a silent corridor lined with dark wood and abstract paintings. A secretary led her to a meeting room, and then she saw them. They were all there, the 3 siblings, their spouses, a few cousins, and at the head of the enormous table sat an elderly lawyer with small glasses and a neutral expression. When she entered, silence sliced through the air like a blade. Their eyes pierced her, shock, anger, disgust, all at once. The eldest son was the first to speak, his voice dripping with venom. "What is she doing here?" The lawyer raised his hand for silence. "Please, everyone, take a seat." She remained standing, her knees trembling. "I said sit down," the lawyer repeated, firmer this time. She obeyed, choosing the farthest chair near the door, ready to run if necessary. The youngest son leaned forward, his eyes narrow. "Doctor, with all due respect, this woman has nothing to do with this family. She shouldn't be here." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and opened a thick folder filled with documents. "She was summoned because the late Mr. Diuski's will requires her presence." Absolute silence. The middle sister stood up, hands pressed against the table. "This is absurd. My father would never—" "Your father," the lawyer interrupted with glacial calm, "left very specific instructions, and one of them was that this young woman be present for the reading of his will." Her blood ran cold. He included her. "This is ridiculous." The eldest son slammed his hand on the table. "She's nothing, a bastard, the daughter of a servant. She has no right to anything." The lawyer remained unfazed. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am not here to debate family relations. I am here to execute the expressed will of a deceased man. And if you refuse to cooperate, I can make this process far longer and far more uncomfortable for all of you." He opened the will, a long, bound document with official seals. "Now, if you'll allow me, we shall begin." The reading commenced. Properties, accounts, investments, all divided among the 3 children, as expected. Each received their share. The mansion would be sold and the money split. The cars, the furniture, the stocks, all neatly distributed. She listened as though it were happening in another world, millions changing hands, fortunes being handed out, and she, once again, invisible. Then the lawyer paused, turned a page. His voice changed, slower, more deliberate. "However," he said, "there is an additional clause, one that Mr. Iwan sealed to be revealed only at this moment." Everyone leaned forward. The lawyer drew out a smaller envelope, sealed with red wax. "This envelope contains instructions regarding a private safe that Mr. Haas kept in his personal office, a safe to which no one but he had access. According to this document, the safe can only be opened in the presence of all parties listed here." The eldest son frowned. "What safe? I've never seen any safe in his office." "Because it was hidden," the lawyer replied, "behind a false panel in the library. Mr. Dusty left a diagram and a combination." He broke the seal and withdrew 2 sheets of paper, one a map, the other a sequence of numbers. The middle sister folded her arms. "And what's in this safe?" The lawyer looked directly at her. "That, ma'am, I do not know, but according to your father's instructions, the contents of the safe will clarify pending matters regarding the true distribution of assets and the recognition of rightful succession." Dead silence. Rightful succession. The youngest son went pale. "What is he talking about?" The lawyer closed the folder. "I suggest we all proceed to the mansion immediately. The safe must be opened today as stipulated. Any delay or refusal will be considered a violation of the deceased's final wishes, which could result in partial or total invalidation of the will." He stood. "My car is waiting. Let's go." No one moved for a long moment. Then slowly, one by one, they rose, and for the first time in 6 months, she was about to return to that house, the house from which she had been cast out into the mud. Only now, something was different. Now, there was a safe, and inside it, the truth the old man had never managed to say in life. The trip to the mansion was suffocating. 2 cars. In the first, the 3 siblings and their spouses. In the second, she and the lawyer, sitting in tense silence. She stared out the window, watching the city pass by. Streets she had walked 1,000 times, squares where she had searched for work, corners where she had slept on desperate nights. Now she was going back, not as a maid, not as an intruder, but as someone summoned by the dead. When the cars stopped in front of the black iron gate, her stomach twisted. That gate, that damned gate that had closed while she stood in the mud. Now it opened slowly, the screech of metal against metal echoing like the house itself resisted letting her in. The siblings stepped out of the car first and walked ahead without looking back. She climbed out slowly, her legs unsteady. The lawyer came to her side. "Are you all right?" She didn't trust her own voice, so she only nodded. They climbed the front steps. The door was unlocked. The eldest son pushed it open, and the familiar smell of the house filled her lungs. Old wood, mildew, and that faint trace of perfume still clinging to the curtains. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different, because he was no longer there. "Where's the office?" the lawyer asked. "Second floor," the sister replied curtly. "But we've searched every corner of that place. There's no safe." "That's because you didn't know where to look." They ascended the staircase in silent procession. With every step, she felt the weight of the house pressing down on her shoulders. Memories flashed through her mind like lightning. Her as a child running down those halls, her mother carrying a tray of tea, the old man sitting alone in his library, staring into nothing. The office was exactly as she remembered. Dark wooden shelves covered 3 of the walls. A large desk dominated the center. Tall windows with heavy drapes guarded the light. The lawyer consulted the diagram. The east wall, behind the 3rd bookshelf. The eldest son frowned. "That shelf's been bolted to the wall for decades." "Then we'll unbolt it." It took 20 minutes and a screwdriver the caretaker fetched from the basement. When they finally moved the bookshelf, it revealed what looked like a solid wooden wall. The lawyer knocked with his knuckles. A hollow sound. "Here." He ran his hands along the surface until he found a small, nearly invisible indentation. He pressed it, and an entire panel released with a soft click, revealing a dark recess. And there it was, a silver steel safe built into the wall with an old digital lock. Everyone froze. The middle sister was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "How long has that been there?" "As far as I know," said the lawyer, "since the house was built. Over 30 years. The youngest son stepped forward. "Just open it. Let's end this nonsense." The lawyer took out the paper with the combination, 6 digits. He typed them slowly, each beep echoing through the silence. The last number. Enter. A mechanical hum. Then, a click. The door opened slowly, heavy, revealing an interior lined with worn red velvet. Everyone leaned closer, holding their breath. Inside, 3 items: a large yellowed envelope, a small polished wooden box, and an old leather-bound notebook with something handwritten on the cover. The lawyer carefully removed them and placed them on the desk. "The envelope first," he said, picking it up. It was sealed. On the front, written in a shaky hand, "To be read after my death in the presence of all my children." The eldest son snatched it from his hands. "All his children are the 3 of us. I don't know why she—" "I'll read it," the lawyer interrupted firmly, taking it back. "Those are the instructions." He opened it carefully and withdrew several handwritten pages. The handwriting was the same as the one in the book, the old man's. The lawyer began to read aloud. "If you are reading this, it means I finally had the courage in death to do what I couldn't in life. I spent my entire existence building an empire. I accumulated wealth, properties, respect. But in the process, I lost something far more valuable. The courage to be honest. When my first wife died, I became a shell. I stopped living and merely existed. That's when she came, the woman who cleaned my home, cared for my things, and never asked for anything in return. And I, the coward that I was, allowed myself to feel again, but only in the shadows, only in secret." The lawyer's voice faltered for a second. He cleared his throat and continued. "From that union, a girl was born. My daughter, as much mine as any of the other 3. But I didn't have the courage to claim her. I feared judgment, scandal, the stain on the family name. So I did the worst thing a father can do. I kept her close, but always at a distance. I gave her a roof, but denied her a name. Her mother died before I could make things right, and I spent the rest of my life carrying that guilt, a weight that crushed every breath." The eldest son was pale. The sister's hands trembled. The youngest stared fixedly at the paper. She, in the corner of the room, could barely breathe. "I know you 3 expelled her after my death. I know you said she wasn't family, but you were wrong. She is my daughter, and she has as much right as you to everything I built." The lawyer turned a page. "Therefore, I declare, Mr. Macready, to be my legitimate daughter, entitled to an equal share of the inheritance. Furthermore, I leave to her the property I loved most in life, the house on the hill where I spent my final happy years." Dead silence. Then the eldest son erupted. "This is a lie. He was senile. This means nothing." The lawyer raised his hand. There's more. He picked up the notebook. This is Mr. E's personal journal. It dates back 30 years, until 3 months before his death. In it, he documented everything. The relationship, the birth of his daughter, his regrets. He opened it to the last page and read, "If I could go back, I would have shouted to the world that she was mine. I would have placed her name beside the others. I would have been the father she deserved. But I was a coward. And now all I can do is hope that this truth, though late, will mend at least part of the harm I caused. To my daughter, the one who carries what could not be said, forgive me. You were always loved, even when I could not show it." The notebook dropped onto the desk with a dull thud. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. No sobs, just a river of pain and relief intertwined. The lawyer reached for the wooden box. And finally, this. He opened it. Inside lay a simple silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Next to it a birth certificate, her name, and on the line marked Father, filled in by the old man's own hand years ago, though never officially registered. His name. The lawyer looked at her. "Miss Diaisi, according to the law and the expressed will of the deceased, you are legally entitled to his surname, your recognition as his daughter, and an equal share of the inheritance." The world spun. The siblings stood like blurred figures, mouths open, eyes wide. She looked at the necklace, then at the certificate, then at the notebook, and finally, she spoke, her first words since stepping into that house. "You said I wasn't family." Her voice was calm, steady, without hatred, only truth. But blood always finds its way home. The room exploded into chaos. The eldest son grabbed the lawyer by the arm. "This can't be legal. He was sick, confused. Anyone could have written that notebook." The lawyer pulled free, his voice steady. "The will was registered at the notary's office 5 years ago, when your father was fully sound of mind. There are 3 witnesses, including a physician who certified his lucidity. All documents are legitimate and irrefutable." The middle sister began pacing back and forth, her hands in her hair. "No, no, no, this will ruin everything. The division is already done. The properties have already been appraised." "Then they'll have to be reappraised," replied the lawyer coolly. "The law is clear. Children have equal inheritance rights, regardless of the circumstances of their birth." The youngest son pointed at her, his face twisted with rage. "She spent her whole life here, eating our scraps, wearing our old clothes, and now she wants to steal what's ours." She didn't answer. She just held the necklace between her fingers, feeling its weight, so light and yet so heavy. But the lawyer didn't let that accusation pass. "Steal? She's claiming what has always been hers by right. You're the ones who tried to erase her existence." He turned toward her, and for the first time there was a trace of gentleness in his tone. "Miss, you have the right to consult your own attorney before we proceed. This is a complex process, and I represent the estate, not you personally." She found her voice weak but present. I don't have money for a lawyer. That can be arranged. The estate itself can cover your legal expenses. It's your right." The eldest son slammed his fist on the table. "This is absurd." "This is the law," replied the lawyer, unshaken. He gathered the documents. "The formal reading of the will and legal procedures will resume in 15 days. Until then, I suggest everyone seek legal counsel. The mansion remains under court order. No one may sell, rent, or remove any belongings until the division is finalized." He looked directly at the 3 siblings. "And to make it clear, any attempt to intimidate, threaten, or harm Miss Diaz will be treated as obstruction of justice and could result in total loss of inheritance rights." The 3 stood frozen. The lawyer turned to her. "Would you like to take anything from here today? Something that belonged to your mother or that holds sentimental value?" She thought for a moment, then walked slowly toward the bookshelf that had been moved. Among the dusty books, her fingers found the volume of poetry, the one he had given her years ago. She pulled it out and held it together with the necklace. "Just this?" The lawyer nodded. "Then let's go. I'll drive you back." She started toward the door but stopped halfway. She turned to the 3 siblings staring at her, faces twisted in disbelief and hatred. There were so many things she could have said. She could have screamed. She could have thrown back every ounce of pain and humiliation they had caused. But instead, she simply said, her voice calm, so calm it surprised even her, "I don't want to destroy you. I never did. I just wanted to be seen." The middle sister looked away. "But you chose to erase me. And now, the truth has done the work I never could have done alone." She left the room, the lawyer beside her. They descended the stairs in silence. When she passed through the entrance hall, she stopped for a moment, looked around. The paintings on the walls, the old chandelier, the marble floor where she had once played as a child, pretending she was part of the family. Now she knew the truth. She always had been. Outside, as the lawyer opened the car door, a shout came from inside the house. The eldest son's voice, distorted by fury. "This isn't over. We'll contest everything. She won't see a single cent." The lawyer sighed. "They'll try. They always do." She got into the car. "And will they succeed?" He started the engine. "Not if the documents hold. And these do. Your father may have been many things, but he was meticulous. He knew exactly what he was doing." They drove in silence for several blocks. Then she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "Why did he wait so long? Why didn't he do this while he was alive?" The lawyer thought before answering. Fear, maybe, shame. Or perhaps he believed that as long as he was alive, he could protect you in his own way, and that, once gone, the truth would be stronger than any opposition. He looked at her through the rear-view mirror. He was right. She pressed the book against her chest. He wrote that he loved me, yes, but he never said it while he was alive. The lawyer didn't reply. There was no answer for that. When they arrived at the boarding house, he turned off the engine. "Miss, in the next few weeks, things will get difficult. They'll try to smear your name, they'll hire expensive lawyers, they'll fight for every cent." She nodded wearily. "But," he continued, "the truth is on your side, and in the end, the truth always weighs more." He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "This is the contact of a lawyer I know. She specializes in inheritance law. She'll represent you with no upfront cost. Her fees will be covered by the estate once we win." "Once?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "When we win." She took the card, her fingers still trembling. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm just carrying out the will of a man who, in the end, tried to make things right." She stepped out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, watching him drive away. Then she climbed the stairs to her small room, went inside, and for the first time in months, lay down without the crushing weight of invisibility. She was still poor, still lived in a miserable room, still worked until her body ached. But now, she had something no one could take away. A name, a story, a truth written by hand by a father who, though flawed, had tried to mend what he broke. She opened the book of poems and read the inscription again, "For the one who carries what could not be said." Now finally she understood. She carried his regret, his silent love, the guilt he never learned to voice. And now, with the truth revealed, she could finally let that weight go. She closed her eyes, and for the first time she could remember, she slept in peace. The news leaked in less than a week. Someone, probably a clerk from the notary's office, or maybe even one of the siblings themselves trying to stir public pressure, had given information to the local press. The headline splashed across the front page of the morning paper. "Deceased businessman leaves inheritance to secret daughter, family contests." She found out on the bus ride home after her night shift. A man sitting next to her was reading the paper, and over his shoulder she saw the old man's face printed beside the headline, and right beneath it, an old photo of the mansion. The man turned the page and she managed to catch a few lines. "Kept secret for decades. Daughter of a former employee. Heirs allege coercion. Attorneys promise a legal battle." She got off 2 stops early, her legs trembling. She went straight to a newsstand and bought the paper with the last coins she had. She read it standing there on the sidewalk, the city moving indifferently around her. The story was sensationalized, but surprisingly accurate. It mentioned the safe, the diary, the birth certificate. There was even a brief formal statement from the lawyer confirming the authenticity of the documents. But what froze her blood was the family's declaration. "This is a shameful attempt by an opportunist to exploit our father's memory. He would never recognize a bastard as his daughter. These documents are falsified or obtained through manipulation. We will fight in court to the very end to protect our family's name." Bastard. The word hurt more than she expected. Even now, with the truth exposed, they still tried to erase her. In the following days, the story spread like wildfire. Radio shows discussed it. Bloggers weighed in. On social media, strangers argued, some calling her an opportunist, others condemning the family's cruelty. She became a symbol, to some, of injustice, to others, of greed. But to her, it was nothing but exhaustion. She didn't want headlines. She didn't want strangers dissecting her life. She only wanted what she had always wanted, to exist without needing to justify her existence. That's when the lawyer called. They had met once right after the reading of the will, a young, sharp woman with eyes that seemed to see through lies. "Have you seen the papers?" she asked bluntly. "I have." "Good, because now we're going to use this to our advantage." "How?" "Public opinion, my dear. They tried to make you the villain, but we're going to turn the story around." 2 days later, the lawyer scheduled an interview. She didn't want to do it. The thought of sitting in front of cameras, of exposing her life to millions, terrified her. But the lawyer was firm. "If you don't tell your story, they'll tell theirs. And trust me, their version paints you as a liar who manipulated a dying old man." So she agreed. The interview was filmed in a modest studio, just her, the host, and a single camera. The host started gently. "Thank you for being here. I know this must be a difficult time." She simply nodded. "Can you tell us in your own words what it was like growing up in that house?" She took a deep breath and began. She spoke about her mother, the back room, the leftovers in the kitchen, the old man's silence, the expulsion. She spoke without anger, without dramatics, just the plain, unvarnished truth. When she reached the part about being thrown out, her voice wavered. "They dragged me into the mud. They shouted in front of everyone that I wasn't family, and I believed them. For a long time I believed they were right." The host leaned forward. "And now, how do you feel now?" She thought for a moment. "Relieved, because he left the truth in writing. He couldn't defend me in life, but he did in death. And that means more than any inheritance." "Do you want the money?" the host asked. Direct, almost aggressive. She met her gaze. "I want what's mine by right, not because I'm greedy, but because for the first time in my life, I want the world to recognize that I existed, that I mattered, that I wasn't a mistake." Silence. Then the host smiled softly. "Thank you for sharing your story." The interview aired 2 days later, prime time, and it exploded. Millions watched. Social media caught fire. Hashtags flooded timelines. "Gabby justice for her," yet truth revealed. Journalists camped outside the mansion, demanding statements from the siblings. They refused to speak, but their silence said enough. Public opinion shifted overnight. What had been opportunistic bastard became wronged daughter. Feminist blogs wrote think pieces. TV shows debated inheritance laws. Even politicians weighed in, calling for reforms on family recognition rights. From her tiny rented room, she watched everything unfold, equal parts disbelief and fear. "All this, because of her?" the lawyer called, thrilled. "Did you see they're backing down? Their attorney just called me with a proposal." "A proposal? They want to offer you a settlement, money in exchange for dropping the case and the surname." "How much?" The lawyer named a figure. It was more money than she would earn in 10 lifetimes scrubbing dishes. "And what do you think?" she asked quietly. The lawyer's tone turned serious. "I think you don't need their money. You'll win this case. The documents are airtight. The judge will rule in your favor. You'll get everything, inheritance, name, recognition. But it'll be a war. It could take months, maybe years. Every detail of your life, and theirs, will be dragged out. It'll be painful." She closed her eyes. "And if I take the deal, you disappear. They erase you again. You become a footnote, settled privately. No one ever learns the full truth." She opened her eyes and looked at the book of poems on her nightstand. "For the one who carries what could not be said." "No, not anymore." "Reject the offer," she said firmly. "I want the judge to decide. I want it on record, official, public. I want to make sure no one can erase me again." The lawyer chuckled, proud. "That's my client." 3 weeks later, the case went to court. It wasn't a jury trial, just a hearing before a judge. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, spectators, even a few supporters she'd never met. The siblings sat on the other side, flanked by 5 expensive attorneys. She had only her lawyer, but she had the truth. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a severe expression, listened to both sides. The siblings' attorneys argued coercion, insanity, forgery. Her lawyer presented the documents, the diary, the certificate, the medical reports proving the old man's lucidity, and witnesses. When it was over, the judge raised his hand for silence. "It is clear to me," he said, his voice echoing through the room, "that Mr. Martinez was fully aware and in sound mind when drafting his will. The documents are authentic. The paternity is proven." The siblings turned pale. "Therefore, I declare that Miss Ax is the legitimate daughter and is entitled to an equal share of the inheritance as provided by law." Bang! The gavel fell. The room erupted in murmurs. She stood frozen, unable to process it. The lawyer hugged her. You won. She had won. Not just the money, but the name, the story, the truth. Across the courtroom, the three siblings walked out silently, defeated, camera flashes following their every step. And she, for the first time in her life, was no longer invisible. She was real, legitimate, a daughter. The court ruling wasn't just a legal victory, it was an earthquake. Within weeks, the lives of the three siblings began to crumble in ways none of them could have foreseen. The eldest son was the first to feel the impact. He was a partner at a consulting firm that thrived on image and reputation. When the story spread, especially the details of how he had dragged his half-sister into the street and thrown her into the mud, clients began to cancel contracts. We don't want our brand associated with someone who behaves like that, one CEO said in an interview. Family values matter. What we saw was cruelty, not leadership. Within 2 months, he had lost 60% of his client base. The company that had taken him 15 years to build was sinking fast. He tried to sue the media outlets for defamation, but his own lawyers advised against it. Everything they published is documented truth. You'll lose, and make it worse. So he did what powerful men often do when they lose control. He exploded. At a corporate event, drunk, he yelled at a journalist who asked about the case. The video went viral. His wife, humiliated by the public scandal, filed for divorce. In 6 months, he had lost his company, his marriage, and most of the fortune he'd inherited, consumed by lawyers and settlements. The middle sister met a different but equally devastating fate. She had always prided herself on her social standing. She chaired charity committees, hosted elegant galas, and moved easily among the elite. Her name opened doors, until it didn't. Her friends stopped inviting her to lunches. Charity events suddenly no longer needed her valuable collaboration. Conversations died the moment she entered the room. She tried to pretend she didn't care, posted smiling photos on social media, showing off a perfect life that no longer existed. But the truth bled through. The comments were cruel. How many half-sisters did you throw in the mud today? Charity begins at home, darling. She deleted her accounts, stopped leaving the house. Depression crept in like a silent shadow. She began taking pills, first to sleep, then to wake up, then just to get through the day. Her husband, a businessman obsessed with public image, began to see her as a liability. You're destroying our reputation, he said coldly one night. People don't want to associate with us anymore. 6 months later, he too filed for divorce. She was left alone in an apartment far too large, surrounded by expensive furniture that did nothing to fill the emptiness. The youngest brother chose a different path, revenge. He hired private investigators to dig into his half-sister's past, searching for anything, a mistake, a lie, something he could use to destroy her credibility. He found nothing. She had lived a simple, honest, invisible life. Frustrated, he tried to bribe witnesses into changing their statements, offered money to her former co-workers to invent compromising stories. One of those people recorded the conversation and leaked it to the press. The scandal was immediate. He was charged with obstruction of justice and lost his license to practice law. His entire career gone. His wife left him, taking their children. He reached out to his siblings for support, but both blamed him for making things worse. You turned this into a circus, the eldest shouted over the phone. Now we're all sinking because of you. The family that had once been united by pride and greed was now torn apart by guilt and mutual hatred. They stopped speaking. Christmas came and went with no gathering. Birthdays forgotten. The mansion, which was supposed to be sold and the money divided, stood abandoned. None of them wanted to face the memories it held. Dust gathered on the windows. The garden grew wild. The house that once symbolized power was now nothing more than a monument to what they had lost. Meanwhile, she watched it all from afar, not with satisfaction, not with vengeful joy, but with a deep, quiet sadness. She had never wanted them to suffer. She never had. All she had ever wanted was to be recognized, and now that she was, she saw that truth carried a price, and they were paying it. One night, as she sat in the small apartment she had rented with part of her inheritance, a message appeared on her phone. It was from the middle sister, just 3 words. I'm sorry, please. She stared at the screen for a long time. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to leave it unanswered, just as so many of her own pleas had been ignored over the years. But she wasn't like them. Slowly, she typed her reply, "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't erase what was done." The response came almost instantly. "I know, and I'll carry that forever." She put the phone down and looked out the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered, indifferent to the private dramas of its inhabitants. Life went on, and she was finally part of it. Not as a shadow, not as a secret, but as a real person, with a name, a story, and rights. The siblings had fallen, but she felt no triumph, only relief, and a lingering question. Was he, wherever he was, finally at peace? Had the truth set his soul free too? She would never know, but she liked to believe it had. It was on a Sunday morning, almost a year after the reading of the will, that she decided to go. The cemetery lay on the outskirts of the city, on a quiet hill where the dead rested beneath old trees. She had never been there before. She hadn't been invited to the funeral. She hadn't even known where he was buried until she searched public records. She took a bus that took over an hour, got off at the wrong stop and walked the rest of the way under a gentle spring sun. The cemetery was larger than she had imagined. Endless rows of headstones, some adorned with fresh flowers, others long forgotten. It took her 20 minutes to find it. His grave was simple, despite the wealth he had amassed in life. A grey granite stone, his name engraved in sober letters, dates of birth and death beneath it. No epitaph, no poetic phrase about legacy or love, just the name, the dates, and silence. She stood there for a long time, unsure what to do. She hadn't brought flowers. She hadn't planned anything. She had simply come. Finally, she sat on the grass beside the grave, legs crossed, the same way she used to sit as a child in the mansion's garden. "Hi," she said softly, feeling a little foolish talking to stone. The wind moved through the leaves of the trees. No response. Still, she continued, "It took me a while to come. I didn't know if I should. I didn't know what to say." She plucked a blade of grass and rolled it between her fingers. The truth came out. "You knew it would, didn't you? That's why you left everything written down, the safe, the diary, the certificate." She smiled faintly, a sad smile. "They were furious. They tried to destroy me again. But they couldn't. Because you gave me something they couldn't take away. Proof." The smile faded. "But I still don't understand. Why? Why did you wait until you died? Why didn't you defend me while you were alive?" The question echoed through the cemetery's stillness. She waited, as if somehow he might answer. But only the wind spoke, soft, whispering through the trees. "I was a child," she went on, her voice cracking. "I was your daughter, and you watched me be humiliated. You saw how they treated me, and you stayed silent." The tears began to fall, hot, unstoppable. "You know what hurts the most? It's not their rejection. I expected that. But I looked at you, hoping that one day you'd say it, that you'd call me your daughter in front of them, that you'd let me sit at the table, that you'd hug me and tell me I mattered." She wiped her face with her hands. "But you never did. And I spent my whole life believing the problem was me, that I wasn't good enough, that I was a mistake." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Then you died, and suddenly, everything changed. Suddenly I had documents, proof, inheritance, a name." She looked at the headstone, eyes red. "But do you know what I wanted more than all of that? I wanted you to have had courage while you were alive. I wanted you to defend me when I needed it most. I wanted you to have been my father, not just on paper." Silence, heavy and complete. Then, slowly, something inside her began to shift. The anger, the hurt, the pain, they were all still there. But alongside them came something new, understanding. "You were human," she said softly. "Imperfect, a coward maybe, but you were just a man. A man who was afraid and of judgment, of scandal, of losing the respect he'd spent his whole life building." She touched the cold stone. "And I think you did the best you could. It wasn't enough. It wasn't what I deserved, but it was what you were capable of giving." She fell silent for a moment. "The diary, I read it all. Every page. You wrote about me, about the guilt you carried, about how you wanted to be different but didn't know how." She smiled again, sad but genuine. "You were a mess, you know that. Contradictory, distant but attentive, cold, but deep down I think you cared, in your strange, broken way." She stood, brushing the grass from her pants. "I don't know if I believe in life after death. I don't know if you're somewhere hearing this, but if you are, I want you to know one thing." She looked up at the sky, blue, vast, endless. "I forgive you." The words came out heavy but freeing. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do." I deserve to live without carrying this anger. I deserve to move on. She touched the headstone one last time. Thank you for leaving me the truth, even if it came late, even if it was imperfect. You gave me what I needed most, the chance to exist without shame. She stepped back. Goodbye, Father. It was the first time she had ever called him that out loud, and it would also be the last. She turned and began walking back through the cemetery. Her steps were light, her chest unburdened. She didn't look back, because for the first time she didn't need to. The past was where it belonged, buried but not forgotten, and she was finally heading where she had always been meant to go, forward. 2 years later, the house on the hill, the one he had left specifically for her, had been restored. It wasn't the grand mansion where she'd grown up. It was smaller, cozier, with wide windows that let in the sunlight, and a garden she tended herself on weekends. But it wasn't just a house. It was a home, and more than that, a refuge. On the bronze plaque by the entrance, the engraving read, "House of Hope, shelter for women and children in vulnerable situations." The idea had come slowly. After the inheritance money was finally released, she found herself faced with a choice. What to do with it? She could have bought a life of luxury, traveled the world, shut herself away in a bubble of comfort, and forgotten everything. But whenever she thought of that, she remembered something. The freezing nights in overcrowded shelters, the desperation of having nowhere to go, the loneliness of being invisible. And then she realized she didn't just want to live well. She wanted others to have the chance to live too. It started small. She rented a modest space and began offering free meals once a week, then twice, then every day. Volunteers began to appear. Donations started coming in. And when the house on the hill was ready, she turned it into a full shelter. Now 15 women and their children lived there temporarily. They received food, clothing, legal aid, psychological support, and most importantly, they received dignity. She didn't run everything alone, and she had a small but dedicated team, yet she was always present. She spoke with the residents, listened to their stories, cried with them, laughed with them, because she understood. She knew what it felt like to be erased, and now she used everything she'd learned from her pain to help others avoid that same fate. One morning, a young woman arrived. She was bruised, a black eye, a swollen lip, holding the hand of a girl about 5 years old, whose eyes were wide with fear. She greeted them personally. "Welcome, you're safe now." The woman collapsed, crying so hard she could barely speak. She hugged her in silence, letting the tears fall freely. Then she led them to a clean room with soft beds and windows overlooking the garden. "Stay as long as you need. No one will hurt you here." The little girl, still shy, asked, "Do you live here too?" She smiled. "No, but I used to live in a place like this once, and someone helped me when I needed it most. Now it's my turn to help you." The girl didn't fully understand, but she smiled back. And in that small, fragile smile, she saw something that reminded her exactly why she had chosen this path. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sky was full of stars. The silence was comforting. She thought about the first time she'd entered that house years ago, right after inheriting it. It had been empty, dusty, full of ghosts. Now it was full of life, voices, hope. "You did it," a voice said behind her. She turned. It was the lawyer, now her friend, who had defended her from the beginning. "Did what?" "Turned pain into something beautiful." She smiled, tired but content. "I don't know if it's beautiful, but it's real." The lawyer sat beside her. "You know, when I first met you, you were a broken woman, invisible, voiceless." She nodded. "I was. And now, you're one of the strongest people I know, and you're using that strength to change lives." She looked down at her tea, thoughtful. "I'm not strong. I still have nightmares, I still cry, I still get angry sometimes. But you don't let that define you." She took a deep breath. "No, because I've learned something over the years. Pain doesn't disappear. We just learn to carry it better. And if we're lucky, we turn it into something useful." They sat in silence for a while. Then the lawyer asked, "Do you ever think about them, your siblings?" She hesitated. "Sometimes, but not with anger. More with pity, maybe. They lost so much because of pride. You know the eldest tried to reach you, right?" She looked up, surprised. "No. About 3 months ago, he sent a letter to the office, apologizing, saying he was wrong, that you deserved more than they ever gave." "What did you do with the letter?" "I kept it. Thought I'd give it to you when you were ready." She paused. "I don't know if I am." You don't have to be. He's not asking forgiveness to feel better. He's asking because he's broken. And that's not your responsibility. She nodded slowly. But if one day you want to read it, I have it. Maybe someday. But deep down, she knew it didn't matter. The forgiveness she had given at the cemetery wasn't just for her father. It was for all of them. And most importantly, for herself. 3 years after opening the House of Hope, she received an unexpected invitation. A local university wanted her to give a talk about resilience and social entrepreneurship. She laughed when she read it. Me? Give a lecture? But she accepted. On the day, the auditorium was packed. Students, professors, even a few journalists. She walked onto the stage, her heart pounding. She looked out at the crowd, and for a moment, saw the girl she once was, small, frightened, invisible. Then she took a deep breath and began. My name is... And for a long time, I believed I was nobody. The room went still. They told me I didn't belong, that I was worthless, that I wasn't part of the family. She paused. And for years I believed it. I lived as if it were true. I accepted the scraps. I accepted invisibility. I accepted the pain. She locked eyes with a young student in the front row. But then something changed. The truth came out. And I realized the problem was never me. The problem was the lies I was told, and the ones I believed. She smiled. Today, I use the inheritance I received to help other women who were erased the way I was. And you know what I've learned? The greatest inheritance isn't money. It's refusing to be invisible. It's insisting on existing, even when the world tells you you shouldn't. Applause filled the room, but she wasn't finished. If you're here today, and you feel invisible, if you feel like you don't belong, I want you to know you exist. You matter. And no one has the right to erase you. The applause returned, louder this time. And at that moment, standing on that stage, she knew she had won, not because she had money, not because she had proven them wrong, but because she had transformed the shout that once expelled her into an echo that now lifted others. You're not part of this family, they had once screamed, but now she had built a new one, a family of broken women rising together. And that no one could ever take away from her. 10 years later, the rain falls softly over the cemetery, just like that distant day when she was thrown out. But now she isn't in the mud. She stands tall, steady, beneath a black umbrella, looking at 2 gravestones side by side. The first is his, the old man's, the father who loved her in silence and defended her too late. The second is new. She had it placed there herself, just weeks ago. It belongs to her mother. For years, she searched for where her mother had been buried. She discovered it was in a public cemetery, a shallow grave, unmarked, no name, no headstone. She had her exhumed, gave her a proper burial, and placed her beside him. Now you can rest together, she whispers. She lays flowers on both graves, white roses for her mother, carnations for her father. She stands there for a long time listening to the rain. Then she smiles. You know, Father, I understand now. It took me a while, but I do. She touches the stone. You gave me the truth when it mattered most. Not when it was convenient, not when it was easy, but when it was necessary. She takes a deep breath. And that truth set me free, not just legally, but here. She touches her chest. It taught me that I always had worth, even when no one could see it. She turns to her mother's grave. And you, Mother, thank you for giving me strength, for teaching me how to survive, for never giving up, even when everything conspired against you. Tears mix with the rain. You were both imperfect, but you gave me something no one can ever take away, the ability to turn pain into love. She stands, brushing her hands clean. I have to go now. 17 women are waiting for me for dinner, and 3 children who want to show me their drawings. She smiles at the gravestones. But I'll come back. I always come back. She starts to walk away, then stops, turns one last time. Oh, and about that shout. You're not part of the family. She smiles, wide and genuine. They were right, I wasn't part of their family. She opens her arms as if embracing the whole world. I'm something bigger. I'm the truth they tried to bury. I'm the justice they never expected. I'm the proof that blood always finds its way home. She turns and walks away under the gentle rain, leaving fresh flowers on the graves. Behind her, the cemetery falls silent. But it isn't an empty silence. It's a peaceful one, because the truth at last rests. And she finally lives.